The version of the film you watched might not be the one that was meant to be seen. In Hollywood, a test screening gone wrong, a nervous studio executive, or an unexpected rewrite can change everything. What begins as a vision, a singular, uncompromising idea, often ends up compromised, chopped, rewritten, reshot. And sometimes, what gets lost in that transition is not just a scene, but the soul of the film itself. Action cinema is particularly vulnerable. Explosions can distract from plot holes, and last-minute edits can smooth over deeper truths. But behind the spectacle, behind the slow-motion shootouts and high-speed chases, there are stories, real stories, of directors fighting to preserve their vision and losing. Some of these films had their endings changed after filming wrapped. Others were entirely rewritten while already in production. A few were so drastically altered in post that the final product bore no resemblance to the original script. And yet, the public was never told. There were no press releases, no disclaimers, just silence. So here's the question. If the version you saw was carefully sanitized, what was so dangerous about the original? What were they trying to hide? Today, we dig through studio memos, leaked scripts, director interviews, and behind-the-scenes accounts to uncover 15 action films that were secretly rewritten on set. You might have seen them, you might even love them. But the truth is, they were never supposed to look like that. We like to think the movies we watch are final, intentional, etched in celluloid with clarity of purpose. But often, what reaches the screen is a compromise. Studio fear, test audience discomfort, ego, profit. These aren't just rewrites, they're erasures of intent, versions of reality swapped in post. 15 action films entered production with one story and left with another. Some got louder, some got safer, all were changed. And yet, in many cases, the public never even knew. No press conference, no warning, just a different ending, a different tone, a different truth. Which raises a final question. What else have we watched, believing it to be whole, when it was only ever half of what it was meant to be? If this list pulled back the curtain on something you'd never noticed, leave a comment. Which rewrite shocked you most? Which original version would you have wanted to see? And if you're drawn to the hidden edits, the buried cuts, the alternate truths, they're not gone. They're just waiting in the darkness. The Wolverine, 2013. The ending that made it to theaters wasn't the one meant to define Logan. The Wolverine was supposed to be an introspective character study. Logan, broken and wandering, facing mortality in Japan. James Mangold envisioned a quiet, tragic meditation on identity, memory, and death. The script originally concluded with Logan rejecting the violence that defined him, walking away from the cycle entirely. But Fox executives weren't sold. They demanded a bigger finale, more explosions, more CGI, and a proper villain. The film's final act was rewritten and reshot to include a robot samurai, a secret serum, and a last-minute twist involving immortality theft. The tone shifted from elegy to boss battle. Mangold later admitted he wasn't happy with the ending, calling it compromised. Ironically, his next film, Logan, 2017, was given full creative freedom and was praised precisely for the restraint the Wolverine lacked, which leads to a haunting question. If studios hadn't intervened, would Logan's first real death have come years earlier and been even more poetic? Tomb Raider, 2018. She was meant to be broken, not bendable. The 2018 reboot of Tomb Raider started as a gritty, grounded survival film closer in tone to The Revenant than a video game adaptation. Early drafts had Lara Croft making morally gray choices, failing often, and wrestling with trauma. It was meant to be an origin story, forged in blood and fear, but test audiences wanted more Lara. The studio wanted more spectacle, so rewrites pushed in flashy action sequences, lightened the mood, and added exposition to explain away ambiguity. Director Roar Uthog's vision of a character slowly becoming the Tomb Raider was replaced with a version who cracked wise and survived implausible stunts. The contrast is evident when comparing trailers to the final product. Certain lines hinting at moral conflict vanished. Subplots involving betrayal and grief were trimmed. In their place came puzzles, chases, and a more familiar hero arc. Did the reshoots give Lara Croft her voice, or drown out the one she was just beginning to find? Rogue One, a Star Wars story, 2016. The trailers showed one movie. The theaters showed another. Rogue One was advertised with intense, ground-level war scenes, rebel soldiers running on beaches, a defiant Jin Erso facing TIE fighters head-on. Yet, almost none of those moments appeared in the final cut. Why? Because the third act was almost entirely reshot. After internal screenings, Lucasfilm decided the film was too slow, too grim. Director Gareth Edwards was sidelined while Tony Gilroy reworked the final third. Character motivations were rewritten, dialogue changed. The entire final battle sequence was rebuilt to include more hope, more action, and less ambiguity. Ironically, the film's ending with the entire main cast perishing remained intact, but how they got there, that was sanitized, rewritten for pacing, rescored for tone. Gilroy later described the original cut as a mess. But fans still wonder what Edwards' war movie would have felt like without the corporate guardrails. Did the rewrite make the film more coherent? Or just more obedient? Demolition Man, 1993. The future wasn't just sanitized on screen, it was rewritten off it. Demolition Man was always meant to be satirical, but the original script pushed the dystopia further, showing a society where rebellion wasn't just frowned upon, it was medically treated. Sylvester Stallone's character, John Spartan, was supposed to awaken into a world of moral lobotomies and cultural erasure, but early cuts felt too dark. Studio executives worried audiences wouldn't connect with a future that bleak, so rewrites softened the edges. Sandra Bullock's character was reimagined to provide more comic relief. Key scenes about the loss of individualism were cut. A subplot involving the government suppressing underground artists was removed entirely. Most viewers remember the Taco Bell product placement or the infamous 3 seashells, but the version they saw was a hybrid action satire layered over a once harsher critique of conformity. Was the comedy a clever disguise? Or a mask forced onto a much darker prophecy? The Exorcist 3, 1990. They didn't want a crime thriller, they wanted a demon, and they forced one in. Originally titled Legion, this sequel was crafted by Exorcist author William Peter Blatty as a slow-burn psychological thriller. No spinning heads, no projectile vomit, just existential dread and philosophical horror wrapped in a murder mystery. But Morgan Creek, the studio, wasn't impressed. Executives demanded a more marketable exorcism. Blatty was forced to reshoot large portions of the film. A new character, the Exorcist Father Mourning, was inserted late in production. Entire dialogue-heavy scenes were cut to make space for a climactic, effects-heavy showdown that Blatty never intended. What resulted was a jarring blend, a meditative, atmospheric story hijacked by a studio-mandated finale. Blatty disowned the changes, and fans still debate which version holds more power, the director's original cut or the awkward compromise released in theaters. Did they fear the film's quiet horror, or just its lack of spectacle? I Am Legend, 2007. The ending you saw wasn't the one they meant, it was the one that tested better. In the original ending of I Am Legend, Will Smith's character realizes that the infected creatures are sentient, mourning the loss of one of their own. He understands that he has become the monster in their eyes. It's a tragic, ironic twist, one that echoes the philosophical roots of Richard Matheson's novel. But test audiences hated it. They wanted action. They wanted triumph. So Warner Brothers commissioned reshoots. In the theatrical version, Neville dies a hero, sacrificing himself with a grenade and handing off the cure. It's neater, cleaner, less complex. Yet the alternate ending, now available on Blu-ray, offers something more haunting, a mirror. It forces us to question perspective, morality, and the nature of survival. It turns a zombie film into a parable. Was the reshoot done to deliver closure, or to avoid uncomfortable truth? Justice League 2017. 2 directors, 2 visions, 1 public disaster. Zack Snyder began Justice League as a grand, operatic continuation of his darker DCEU vision. Then, tragedy struck, he stepped away after a family loss. Warner Brothers brought in Joss Whedon to finish the film. But Whedon didn't just finish it, he rewrote it. Over 80 pages of script were changed. New jokes were inserted. Entire character arcs were removed or softened. Cyborg's tragic backstory, central to Snyder's cut, was gutted. Scenes were made brighter, shorter, and more quippy, leaning toward Avengers-style energy, but clashing awkwardly with the somber foundations Snyder had laid. The final result? A theatrical version that pleased no one. It bombed critically and commercially. Only years later, after a persistent fan movement, was Snyder's original cut released on HBO Max. That version, longer, weightier, more coherent, sparked debate about studio interference and artistic sabotage. So now we ask, was Whedon's rewrite a rescue mission, or a corporate cover-up for creative fear? Solo, a Star Wars story, 2018. Two directors walked out, one walked in. The story never recovered. Phil Lord and Christopher Miller were originally hired to bring a fresh, irreverent tone to Solo, blending action with subversiveness. But their improvisational style clashed with Lucasfilm's rigid vision. Midway through filming, after nearly 70% was complete, they were fired. Ron Howard was brought in to finish the film, but what he really did was remake it. Howard reshot over 80% of the movie. Tone was rebalanced, humor was dialed down, scenes were rewritten, restructured, and recast. The result was a safer, more conventional origin story that critics called competent but unnecessary. The box office disappointment wasn't just about timing, it was about identity. Was Solo a heist film, a western, a tragedy, or just corporate damage control? The fingerprints of two visions were read, and so does the dissonance. Did Lucasfilm rescue a chaotic project, or erase a bold experiment in the name of control? Blade Trinity, 2004. Sometimes the biggest rewrites happen on set, when your lead actor refuses to act. Blade Trinity was supposed to conclude the trilogy with a grim, supernatural war. But what unfolded was a production nightmare. Wesley Snipes, reportedly unhappy with the script and direction, clashed with director David S. Goyer to the point of near mutiny. Communication broke down. Scenes were rewritten on the fly. Supporting actors were given expanded roles, not because it served the story, but because Snipes refused to show up for wide shot. Much of the dialogue was redubbed. Stand-ins and CGI were used to complete scenes. Ryan Reynolds and Jessica Biel ended up carrying the film's energy, even though the script had never intended for them to take center stage. The result was a patchwork of tone and purpose, part buddy comedy, part vampire war, part salvage operation. And while some enjoy its chaotic charm, it's clear the film that was written wasn't the one that was filmed, and certainly not the one that was released. Was Blade's legacy derailed by ego or by a system that couldn't handle confrontation? G.I. Joe, Retaliation, 2013. It wasn't just delayed, it was dismantled and reassembled to save a star. Originally slated for summer 2012, G.I. Joe Retaliation was abruptly pulled just weeks before release. The official reason? Conversion to 3D. But insiders knew better. The real motivation was panic over Channing Tatum's death early in the film. Test audiences disliked the decision, and Paramount realized they might have killed off their franchise's most bankable face. The reshoots were drastic. Entire new scenes were added to bring Tatum back into the film via flashbacks and extended intros. The story, initially darker and more focused on Dwayne Johnson's character, was restructured to give more emotional weight to Tatum's exit. These changes created a tonal mess. The film juggled different timelines, awkwardly stitched footage, and an uneven emotional arc. But it did what the studio wanted, saved face, preserved star appeal, and gave audiences a more digestible narrative. Still, fans of the original cut rumored to be tighter, leaner, and more brutal wonder. Was the rewrite done to serve the story, or just protect the brand? Live, Free, or Die Hard, 2007. One version was rated R, the other was rated PG-13. Only one got released. The Die Hard series had always been unapologetically brutal violence, profanity, and grit were part of its DNA. But with Live Free or Die Hard, Fox aimed for a wider audience and a safer rating. What began as an rated tech thriller evolved into a PG-13 action vehicle. That transition wasn't just in tone, it was built into the reshoots. Several scenes were redone to reduce blood, tone down language, and soften the stakes. Iconic catchphrases were sanitized, shootouts became less bloody, and certain death scenes were trimmed or reimagined entirely. Director Len Wiseman later admitted that studio pressure guided the reshoots toward a more teen-friendly experience. While the PG-13 version was a commercial hit, longtime fans were frustrated. A later, unrated cut on home media restored some of the original intensity, but it was already too late. The theatrical version had become canon. Did toning it down help introduce Die Hard to a new generation? Or betray everything the franchise stood for? Suicide Squad, 2016. This wasn't David Ayer's movie. It was a marketing department's remix. After the success of Deadpool and Guardians of the Galaxy, Warner Brothers panicked. The original cut of Suicide Squad, dark, grim, character-focused, was suddenly off-brand. David Ayer's version reportedly opened with a brooding tone, focused heavily on backstories, and leaned into the psychological torment of each character. Then came the infamous reshoot. A trailer editing company, Trailer Park, was hired to cut a new, upbeat trailer using Queen's Bohemian Rhapsody. It went viral, and suddenly, that tone became the new gold. The studio ordered massive reshoots to inject more humor, color, and action. Entire scenes were deleted. Jared Leto's Joker, originally a major antagonist, was slashed into near irrelevance. Multiple versions of the film allegedly exist, and fans have long campaigned for the Ayer cut. Ayer himself has confirmed that the theatrical version was not his movie. What audiences got was a Frankenstein's monster spliced together by conflicting visions, edits, and studio paranoia. So we ask, did Warner Brothers sabotage a flawed but bold film, or save audiences from something too dark to sell? Rambo 1988, the original enemy? Too real, too political, too inconvenient. Rambo 3 was supposed to be the most politically charged entry in the franchise. Early drafts had John Rambo confronting both Soviet and American forces in Afghanistan, exposing the duplicity of U.S. foreign policy. But as production advanced, that vision became too controversial. The film's first version was shot with Rambo becoming disillusioned, not just with war, but with the very people funding it. Scenes were filmed showing CIA agents manipulating the Mujahideen, and Rambo questioning his own role in the conflict. However, after a disastrous preview screening and growing concern from studio heads, the reshoots began. Much of the final act was reworked. Dialogue was scrubbed of political critique, and the plot was streamlined into a simple rescue mission template. The result? A loud, explosive spectacle with Rambo fighting Soviets in caves, without context or ambiguity. The studio believed audiences didn't want nuance, they wanted fireballs. Decades later, critics revisiting early scripts noted how much sharper, darker, and more morally conflicted the original version had been. The question is, did the rewrite protect the franchise, or dilute its last chance at relevance? World War Z, 2013. The world didn't end. It was rewritten. When World War Z was first announced, fans of the original novel expected a sprawling, geopolitical mosaic of a zombie outbreak, told through global interviews and fractured timeline. What they got instead was a conventional action blockbuster centered around Brad Pitt's character, and even that version barely made it out alive. The film's third act was completely reshot. Originally, the story ended in Russia with a massive, war-torn sequence involving political revolutions and a dark, dystopian aftermath. Test audiences hated it. It was deemed too bleak, too confusing, and perhaps most damning, not heroic enough for an American lead. So Paramount made a drastic choice. They scrapped the entire third act, fired screenwriter Damon Lindelof, and brought in a new writing team. What followed was one of the most radical rewrites in blockbuster history. The explosive Russian ending was replaced by a quiet, subdued infiltration scene in a WHO research facility. Gone were the tanks and snow. In came tension, silence, and science. The tonal shift was so jarring that even Brad Pitt admitted in interviews that it felt like a different movie. The reshoot saved the film financially. It became a hit. But to this day, glimpses of the original ending survive, production stills, abandoned sets, and angry comments from the original film. It begs the question, did audiences see the better version, or just the safer one? The Bourne Identity, 2002. This wasn't just a spy thriller, it was a salvage operation that rewrote itself. When the Bourne Identity was shot in 2000, it was meant to kickstart a grounded, pseudo spy franchise less Bond, more Kaufman. But after a early test screening, the studio panicked. The tone was too slow, the story too internal, the world was changing 9/11 had just happened, and Universal demanded a faster, more kinetic version. The fix? Massive reshoots nearly a year later. The entire scene was rewritten and refilmed, including a brand new ending shot just months before release. The original climax, Jason Bourne confronting his past in a world-heavy sequence, was replaced with an explosive chase and rooftop escape that was easier to market. Director Doug Liman, already clashing with producers, was pushed aside during post-production. It was a quiet coup. What makes it stranger is how successful the rewrite turned out to be. The reshot ending tested far better. The film became a hit, and a franchise was born. But it came at a cost. Lyman was removed from the sequels, and his vision of an anti-Bond trapped in moral ambiguity was buried under the necessity for adrenaline. Did the studio save the movie? or erase the soul of what could have been a very unforgettable espionage classic. Equilibrium, 2002. They cut the philosophy and kept the gun kata. Equilibrium was born out of Post 9, divided by 11 paranoia and Orwellian fears. Written and directed by Kurt Wimmer, it imagined a world where emotion itself was outlawed. The script was dense-packed with philosophical debates, ethical dilemmas, and long monologues about art, war, and truth. But Miramax wasn't interested in existentialism. They wanted The Matrix 2. During post-production, entire dialogue sequences were cut. Scenes that questioned the ethics of rebellion were shortened or removed. A subplot involving the black market poetry trade was deleted entirely. What remained was sleek violence, cold architecture, and Christian Bale flipping through crowds in slow-motion gun ballet. Stylish, yes, but the message? Muted. Years later, a cult fanbase pieced together deleted scenes and early drafts, discovering a film far more cerebral than the theatrical cut allowed. Did we get the best version of Equilibrium? Or just the one that looked coolest in trailers?